Hi everyone, welcome to this video. Today we're going to be looking at how we do the data cleaning process for the project. So thus far I've asked you all to put faith in my systems and documents and processes. So I want to show you a little bit more about how it works and show you basically what happens after the point of data collection. So hopefully once you have finished data collection, you've got a lovely Qualtrics page that is full up with responses, and you can see here this is an example from one of my students here at the University of Greenwich, Taylor Rizzo Powell. So you can see that she's got around 98 participants. So what we're going to do is have a look at it, and I'll show you exactly what I'm going to do as part of the process, and hopefully this will help explain what goes on. So we can see here what we're going to go to is data and analysis. So what I want to do essentially here is to extract all the data in a nice Excel file. So I go here, we can see all the different points of data, and I just click export data. And what I want to be very careful to do is to make sure it's choice text rather than numeric values. Click on more options, and what I need is this particular option, which is export viewing order data for randomized surveys. And this basically tells us information about what condition that participant was allocated to. So this is obviously for the direct replication. So this is hopefully going to then download all of the data into a very nice spreadsheet for us, and we'll have a look at it. We'll just eyeball the data very briefly. So we can see it here. And as you can see, with Qualtrics, there are 3 different lines at the top with all the different headings and subheadings, and you can see this information around. Okay, so we've got a few withdrawals and non-completions and things like that. Looks to be fairly randomly covering each of the conditions. And we can see here that it is correctly exported the block order, aka what condition the participants were in. So you can see here the code of low or high, ethical or unethical for the last 2. So lots of different combos. So that looks good to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to save this. So what I will do is, in this case, because I'm quite lazy, I'm going to put it on my desktop because I'm pretty awful with this sort of thing, and I'm just going to call it direct data, and I call it choice, so it's a reminder to me to ensure I save it as export it as a choice rather than numeric. Okay, so that is now on my desktop, and we can get rid of this. We don't need to see that again. We also don't need this. I'm going to get rid of that too. And so what we can now do is start running the data cleaning process. And so what I use for this is a piece of software called R and RStudio. So R is like the basic core programming, and the RStudio basically tidies it up and makes it look a bit nicer and makes it easier to work with. And so what you can see here is basically 4 key sections. So in this bottom one, whatever is going on, this is where you can find it. So any outputs, any results, and you can type directly in here if you want to. So if you want to say 2 plus 2, and it tells you it's 4, which is nice. Let me zoom in slightly. Just so you see it a bit easier. There we are. So you can type directly into there, but what I do is I set up these files of code that are ready, and basically we can just follow them very simply, but I'll show you what happens. In this top right hand corner is the environment. So if anything we use basically, so for example a data set or a subset of the data, it will be recorded there as something that we can continue to work with. And then the bottom right is anything like files or things like that that are useful for us. So what we're going to do is we are going to run through this piece by piece, and I'll tell you what I'm doing on each of these kind of processes. So So first, what I'm doing is setting my working directory. And this is basically a nice way of saying, hey, R, this is where the stuff you need is. Okay, so this is where to read things from. So as I've saved things onto my desktop, I've put it as my desktop. Then what we need to do is to open a couple of packages. So packages are like apps on your phone. Okay, so you can download them, but every time you want to use them, you need to open them. So what I'm doing here is this downloads it. If you are new to running this code, you can download it. And as you can see down here on the bottom right, it will show you things of, whether it works or not, or whether it's an error code in this case. It says I don't need to, so I'll not bother. And then we need to open our packages. So I'm using the dplyr package here. It is a very common package. It does lots of things around moving data and playing around with it. So it's super useful. So now we can start the process. So the first thing I want to do is to load the data. So here what I'm saying is there is a CSV file, so a comma delineated file on my desktop called direct data choice, and I want it and I want to save it as what's known as raw data. And so you can see here it's popped up in my right hand column, raw data, and if I click on that I can see that it is very nicely spat out the Qualtrics file for me exactly as it would look in Excel. So that's great. Then what I want to do is to make sure that it's saved as a data frame. So I just run that little line of code there to make sure that basically means I can work with it more easily. Now, as you might have seen, this data file includes all the headings and subheadings, which is not really anything that we would like to use. So what I do is I get rid of the first heading, and you can see here that there should now only be two headings, so a heading and one heading, and we run that again to make sure we get rid of the second heading. So that means the only things we've got are data. So you can see now there's no subheadings, we've just got the data. So that's good. I should note, by the way, my code here is not perfect. So if anybody was an expert in R, they'd say, gosh, there's easier and better ways of doing things. That's in life. There's always better and easier ways of doing things. What I've got is something practical, and hopefully it's easy to see what I'm doing. So for those who are experts in R, forgive me. Hey. But now what I want to do is to rename some of my values, rename some of my columns. So you can see they're basically all a bit odd. And, for example, what does Q6 actually mean? So what I'm going to do is rename them. And you can see here, so any one that starts, so the question 5 is actually questioning, do participants give consent to take part? So we want to rename it consent. And you can see here, there are a number of different versions. So anything, question 19 are the quality checks, question 13 is sex, manipulation checks are those, for example. And then anything that starts with Q6, so there's Q6_1, Q6_2, these are the locus of control questions, and similar with 7 with Machiavellianism, question 8 with social desirability, and question 11 with manipulation check. So what we need to do is run all that code, and down here confirms that it's happened. And then again, if we open raw data, we will no longer see random numbers, but we will see instead LOC1. So that tells me that it's item 1 for the locus of control scale. So that's great. So it's all working as it should thus far. Okay, so the first thing to ask is, what is our total number of participants? How many participants have we potentially got? And we run that, and you can see down here, it's 98. And you can see that's confirmed over here as well. So we've got 98 observations. Then what we need to do is we check how many participants have given consent and how many haven't. And you can see here, so basically I'm asking how many rows of data are there where people don't say, I agree. Basically, I agree to take part in the study. And that's 5. So what we're going to do is remove those people who didn't consent to taking part in the study. There wouldn't be any data for us to analyze anyway. So because of the way we've set up the Qualtrics file, it would have rerouted them to the debrief page. So we don't need to worry about that anyway, but we can remove these 5. And obviously 98 minus 5 is 93. So that's positive. Great. Next thing we want to do is check that participants consider themselves to have taken part in the project successfully and appropriately. So if you remember, again, at the end of the Qualtrics file, the survey, we asked, we really want to make sure that this data is meaningful. Should we use your data for this research project? And there were two options, basically, yes, use my data, or no, don't use my data. So what I want to check is how many people have said, yes, my data is good to use, and how many people have said, no, my data isn't good to use. And you can see here that 24 people have said, no, don't use my data. So this is quite high, but we might imagine, for example, if data collection happened during the time in which students needed to collect a certain amount of credits to demonstrate they've engaged with research, then this might have happened. Obviously, not cool, not acceptable, not great, but the reality is that's going to happen. So what we now do is we remove all the participants who basically said anything apart from, yes, use my data. So we're going to run these. So we then do 93 minus 24, and you can see is 69 participants. So this is just some basic tidying up. And again, if you see that, what you'll now see is that all the information is there for everybody. So basically everybody who's here now has a full data set. So that's great. Next, what we can do is we can recode any Likert scale data, so strongly agree to strongly disagree, 1 to 5, into a numeric value. So rather than it being strongly agree, it's now 5, for example. So we just run that, and I've said it's for these specific variables, so anything from locus of control question 1 to question 36.4. Run, and what we can do is you can see this stop is going on, and basically if you ever want to stop something from happening, you can see it, but it basically tells you it's working on it. I'm doing something. So we can click on here, and we can see that what was previously strongly agree, strongly disagree, etc., is now lovely numbers. So obviously much easier to analyze numbers than text, so we are good to go with that. Now, for each subscale, each scale we've adopted, there are a few processes that we need to follow. So, for example, we've got reverse scored items in some of the scales, so we've had to reverse score them, and this is the code to do so. So, for example, on the Machiavellianism scale, questions item 1 to 5 and questions 9 should be recoded the opposite way. So you can see here I'm asking 1s to be 5s, 5s to be 1s, etc. And only for these specific items. So we can run that. That tells me it's done. Then to extract a little bit of useful information about the kind of psychometric properties of the data that the scale has helped produce, what I've done is I've partitioned. I'm going to ask R to partition out the data in relation to Machiavellianism. And so if I run that, what you can see is now we have a new thing in our environment called Mac data, and it's basically just people's responses to the Machiavellianism scale. And so obviously with 10 items, so we can see 10, and everybody has responded to everything. And you can see a nice mix of scores here, everything from 1 to 5. So looks good. So what we now do is we're going to evaluate the omega of that scale. So omega is just an alternative to Cronbach's alpha. It's an internal reliability estimate, and some consider omega to be a little bit more preferable to Cronbach's alpha based on the way it's calculated. So but it spits out both, so it tells us both. So we can see here that our omega is 0.77 and our Cronbach's alpha is 0.65, so slightly different. So that's for our Machiavellianism scale, and you can see there it tells you lots of other information around the scale that we don't really need for the purposes of this. Obviously, if you're interested, you can have a look at it later, but you really don't need to for the purposes of this. Although you may, if you have a supervisor interested in these things, they may want to dig into it a little bit more. Okay, and then what we then after that, so we've checked our Cronbach's alpha and it looks okay. or our omega. So then what we want to do is to create a total score. So often in psychology it's suboptimal, but we work with basically adding all the numbers up and taking your average or total score, and that's exactly what we do here. So what I've asked them to do is to create a new variable called MacTot, which is the total Machiavellianism score, and it's basically the sum of Machiavellian question 1 to Machiavellian question 10. And we can run that. And so then what we have is a total score, and that should be right at the end of this. So we go right to the end, and you can see that we should have, there we are, we have a Mac total score. So that's great. Good. Everything is working as it should do thus far. Always reassuring. So what we then do is repeat this same process for all the other different scales. So social desirability, we have got locus of control, and we have got our behavioral intention score. So we can run all that. Excellent. You can see all the outputs for this are here. So if you do want to have a look at, so for example, social desirability had an alpha of 0.62 and an omega of 0.74. So that's useful. Great. Then what we can do is, so if we're worried that we have missing data or people have said NA, basically we can convert all of those to 0 so they can be totaled. So basically, when we randomly allocated people to different conditions, what it then leaves is you've got a little bit of data in your file, but then lots of NA, because they didn't do these other conditions. So if I show you on here, it's probably on the next page, you can see lots of NAs where they only completed a few of the questions because those are the ones relating to their condition. So what we're going to do is to convert all of those NAs to zeros, and then we're going to kind of merge them all into the same columns. So that means basically, as long as we know which condition they're in, their response is their total score refers to the same thing. And in this case, we're looking at the 4 questions, which are the behavioral intentions outcome. So this is what we're doing. We're just combining them all into the same columns. So that means we've got, regardless of which condition they're in, one column refers to the question 1 response, one column refers to question 2 response, etc., etc. So we're going to create that. Lovely, lovely. So what I've done is I've converted all of these numbers, zeros, 2s, and then we look at the outcome at the end, and we can see this is what we look like. So, for example, participant 1 has responded as a 4 to all of the behavioral intention questions. Super. So now what we do is we separate the behavioral intention questions from the others, and then we look at the alpha, the omega of these. So we'll have a quick look. Okay, and you can see if it scrolls up, there we are, that it has a omega of 0.92 and an alpha of 0.91. So that tells us that people respond very, very similarly to each of these items. Great. And then we're going to create a total score of behavioral intention, and we can do I'm going to do some magic prediction, right? So we've got 4 questions. Participant 1 responded 4 to each of them. So that should technically mean that if it's done properly, it should be 16 for participant 1. So we can double check that. And feel free to do these little tests for yourself when you do run through and have a look at your data, because they do help. And you can see here, perfect. So it has added them all up nicely. And just to double check the next one. Excuse me. 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. So that has worked nicely. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to check these things, but it's just nice to reassure yourself that it is doing what we think it's doing. Next, this is a piece of code that basically tells us, instead of this wordy account of what condition people are in, it gives it a number instead. So there are obviously 8 different conditions based on whether the quality of work experience was high or low, and then whether their managers and their peers were ethical or unethical. So we run all those. And so that has recoded it into a number. And then what we're doing is we're creating 3 different variables which tell us basically, were you in the high or the low condition? Were you in the ethical or unethical manager condition? Or were you in the ethical or unethical peer condition? So it creates a column for us. And again, we can have a look to check that that's done properly if we'd like. So let's go right to the end of the data. And we can see here we are. So we've got now it's got in lovely text basically all the information we need to know at a distance, what condition participants were in for each of the 3 different kind of manipulated factors. Next up then is what we do is we create a new data frame with all the relevant variables for analysis. So there's obviously, you collected loads and loads of data. What we really only need for analysis is the kind of total scores. So what we've got is a data frame that just picks out all the relevant ones for analysis. And you can see I've saved it as pro data or process data. Here you can see everything you need to know, which is which condition they're in for the 3 manipulated factors in the vignette, their locus of control total, their social desirability total, their Machiavellianism total, the sex of the participant, their total behavioural intention score, the outcome score, and then their responses to the 3 manipulation check items. And then what I do is I end this process by exporting that process data back into my desktop. So if I then go and try and find where it's gone, I can now open that up. And what we have is a Qualtrics file, a CSV file, an Excel file ready for analysis. And that's it. That's the process of data collection. So it feels like it's quite a lot, but in principle, what you can do, and what I will do, is simply scroll across it all, run it, and then it will spit it out automatically. So it will do everything without any intervention from me whatsoever. So I hope that's been useful to talk through and to see how that has worked. And hopefully now when we discuss and work together on these sorts of data files, you can see very simply how to move forward. So I'll be in touch next time. We're going to be talking about how to analyze the data, and we'll be using this exact Excel file to see what the results might be for our research. So I'll look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, stay safe and take care. See you soon.